made it.
Hello again, and welcome to 3reate. I'm your host, Andrew Newman. 3reate features two types of episodes in a single feed, weekly and interviews. Each week, Nathan and I discuss current trends, our projects, and whatever else is on our minds. We'll also bring you fortnightly episodes where I interview folks across art, science, and technology, where we dive into their stories and get to the heart of how creativity drives them. My AI co-host will now introduce this episode, and I'll be back with you in about a minute. Thanks for listening.
Hello, I am your AI co-host. Andrew and Nathan explore how modern life, saturated with endless communication channels and choices, is leading to a breakdown in basic interactions. Starting with a personal story about team dysfunction in a government accelerator program, they use the cereal aisle analogy to explain how having too many options makes everything more complicated. They then share relatable anecdotes from unhelpful restaurant staff to unresponsive companies and failing government services like the post office to show how this problem of being overwhelmed is causing a decline in accountability and the erosion of societal norms. And now, the humans.
We almost didn't do it.
Yeah, we almost got content that we did not record and have for the podcast.
Yeah, I'll give my update after. I interrupted you to say we should record.
I was just saying, I'm part of this program called the Department of Energy Boost, and it's basically like an accelerator, but you apply to the program and the government has acquired some IP, or let's say the Department of Energy has acquired some IP. And they do this matchmaking thing where a bunch of people who apply, they look at your background, they vet what your skills are, and try and form a multidisciplinary team that is assigned an IP. And you effectively go do customer discovery. You find out what the market opportunities are. A lot of it is really first learning what the technology is, what the IP is. And then the rest of it, I think, is honestly navigating how to work with it, because you don't own the IP. The ownership is the government, but you're also trying to add value. So your traditional exercises that you would do if you're trying to do a startup, quite the same. Like you need to be thinking about business models in the future, but you're jumping the gun because you don't own anything yet. You can't build anything off of it. So it's really weird to navigate. But on top of that, you're matched with people that you probably don't know. So you're really trying to get a sense of how these other people work and what they like doing and what they don't like doing. And we all have other priorities in life. So the program's kind of a weird mishmash of people, skills, and timing. And I think one of the difficulties that I'm encountering, and I think this is common amongst other people in this program as well, is if everyone has their own priorities, you can't quite dedicate the time you need in this early stage, which is actually critical before you can actually get stuff off the ground. So it almost feels like this weird catch-22 of fail to start because you're not communicating well, you're not working on things together, but you need to do that in order to move the program along. So it's just a really weird situation where people just go MIA and you poke them all the time and they're not responding. But then one of your other partners makes some really good progress. So I'm in this weird situation where I've been in most of the conversations, like most of the customer recovery calls and most of the meetings. One of our partners has been a little absent. So it's like trying to catch each other up.
Yeah.
So it's like you set up tiers where, hey, if it's urgent, do a phone call. If you're expecting a response in a day or two, send a message, a text message, or a group chat or whatever, Slack. And then last is, okay, emails like on your own time, but within maybe a week or so. So it's like following those kind of communication establishments, but it's also, you got to do it. You can't just establish them and say that's how it works. You actually have to follow them. Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So it's difficult working with people who are all self-starters. Like we all have our own things and we all do stuff, but making sure you're on the same page, I think, is fairly relevant to some of the stuff that we've been talking about recently with working in teams, working in small teams, and quote unquote management, because you're all trying to manage each other at this point. You're all equal. So that's the main stuff that I've been trying to navigate and work through.
Yeah.
The thing I've come to is I think this is a good opportunity and there's only so much I can control. So how your other partners are participating in this program is something that you can't really affect too much. You can do what you can and then move on. So I'm doing what I can to move things forward. And if people are following me, then great. Sometimes because you want to bring the people along with you if you want success.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this, I think, last episode.
Yeah, you can post-process the normalization.
Yeah. The more options people have for stuff, the worse everything seems to really get. And so the hedge for the monopoly problem where there's one option is many options. Mm-hmm. And our economy, at least in the States, is built on that, right? So you go to the store and there's 50 different types of cereal. At the end of the day, there's only so many types of grains that you make cereal from, right? So there's only really so many different options of core product. And then maybe you add more sugar, you add food coloring, and you try to differentiate the different types of wheat. But in the same kind of bent of that, there's the consumer space where we call it multimodal communication, where it used to be like you'd write something, you'd say something, you would repeat something back. But now it's like there's so many different communication channels, right? So there's email, there's 100%. Slack, there's phone, there's in person, there's Google chat, there's Teams. Every company has their own chat. Every company has their own system. Email is still email, thankfully. We can talk about why that is, because it's a federated service. We've talked a little bit about it too, but it breaks down to also synchronous and asynchronous styles of communication.
Yeah,
almost everything other than talking to somebody in person or on the phone is asynchronous. I think we're getting to a point in society where there's just too much of everything. There's too much information. There's too much choice. There's too many variations on things that you might like. But I think it's because you're not also working like full time on this, you presumably have other projects going on. So not only do you have the 5 different types of communication for this project, they have probably, I use Slack for this project, I use Slack for this other project. So it's not only like I have one type of communication, like your phone is your phone. People call you, they call you, right? But with Slack, it's like the product is Slack, but you have different companies, different groups of people, different norms, all asynchronous, and it's all on the same platform, but it's still different. So now you have even more, it's nested, you have nested options. And I think people just get overloaded at this point.
I think you're right. Yeah,
it's the only thing I can come, or people, everyone just sucks. Like I think it's an extreme because I see this everywhere. And a good example. So I was out to lunch, I think 2 days ago, and went to a seafood place for lunch. And a person I was with asked, "Where is the seafood from?" Which, if anybody's been to a seafood
interesting
restaurant,
kind of question.
The waitress kind of looked at us and they were like, "Is it farm raised or wild caught?"
That's what, okay. I thought, like, what region? Like,
yeah.
Do they know?
And then the waitress goes, "It's from our distributor."
Nice.
And we
Good
were
answer.
like, cool. But is it wild caught or farm raised? And then it's definitely wild caught. And I'm like, 2 seconds ago, you didn't know where it was from. Now you're very confident that it's wild caught. Okay. But so it was a really weird interaction. And then the salad dressing had some kind of generic salad dressing name. It wasn't like ranch or it was some kind of homemade concoction. And so they asked, "What's that salad dressing made of? What are the ingredients?" So we just gave up. We're like, whatever. And I think so. We're at a restaurant, and I don't know, maybe everyone thinks this is insane, but if somebody has like food sensitivity, especially in 2025, I feel like asking for ingredients list is not unheard of. And it's not like we were probing for some weird sort of spice, or it was just like, what are the basic ingredients of this dressing? And they put a lot of flavorizers, and there's a lot of calories, a lot of sugar. And so if you don't get a quote unquote naturally made dressing, then they might have a 500 calorie salad because of the dressing. Yeah. Or there could be a bunch of preservatives, MSG, all sorts of stuff in it that is in there to try to quote unquote make it better. So I don't think a really strange question. We were at a really nice place, so it should have been kind of like, oh yeah, I'll go check. That's the protocol. If you as a waitress or waiter don't know something at a nice restaurant, you go, I'll go check. And then maybe you make something up. I don't know. But you don't sit there and so I guess my point on this is that that's a very simple communication. Like, you're at a restaurant, you want to know if the food is farmed or wild, which in seafood world, for anyone who doesn't eat seafood or know a lot about seafood, pretty standard question. More and more stuff's farmed. There's all sorts of opinions on either side of if it's better to eat farm, if it's better to eat wild, but I like to know where it's from too. But to your story about the different kind of communication methods and problems, I used to think that I would try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but I just keep seeing these problems get worse. And I have a litany of stories from this week that I've had this problem with. I tried to get in contact with my car insurance company and I call them, no answer. For faster service, text us. Great. Text them. 3 days later, no response. Text them again. What's up?
Yeah.
Another day goes by. I'm like, what the? And then finally I get a call from them. And they're like, oh, we couldn't text you back for some reason. And I'm like, what?
Yeah, I have a similar encounter. It's like you go to a website and they say, send us a WhatsApp message. And you send them a WhatsApp message and it doesn't do anything. It doesn't even work. Like it says, hey, how can I help you? And you ask it a question.
And then I went to the post office yesterday to mail something. I needed to mail it, tracking and return receipt and that kind of stuff. The woman behind the counter puts in the address. And she says, I'm sorry, we can't validate this address. I was like, okay, maybe I fucked it up.
I'm very familiar with that.
And then so she says, oh, it's going to this state. We've been having problems validating addresses in that state. And I'm like, the post office should arguably be able to do one thing. And that should be to tell me if I'm mailing something to a U.S. address in a U.S. post office, they should be able to tell me, like,
yeah.
In 2025, 100 years ago, sure, they'd have to look it up or whatever. Or like theoretically something changed and it was out of date. But I'm like, come on, it's the post office. She was really nice about it. And she said there's been some kind of outage for 3 days. So this is not an example of the government not working. This is an example of people like Doge up the government and like it's a silent fail, right? And most people probably have no idea that the system has been down for 3 days. I wouldn't have known had I not tried to go in. And so why does that matter? The danger is that the thing I'm sending doesn't get to the place because I might have done the address wrong.
Yeah.
I guess maybe for people, when you mail something,
who does that?
The computer system
yeah.
checks the address that you put on the package to make sure that it exists in the system that they can map it to. So they'll send it, the package gets to where it goes. It used to be that didn't happen. You would get to at least the post office of the zip code. So they just automatically validate it now when you go to the post office, which is why sometimes they'll ask you, it might change a little bit. Again, like avenue or drive or terrace or street. A lot of people don't realize like those things really do matter when it comes to especially bigger cities. It could be a totally different part of town. And so they just do that. That's just part of mailing something in 2025. But that service is down. It's insane that the United States government, the richest, most powerful, prosperous government on the planet, can't even validate a package in my own state. For the record, I'm not sending this like across the country. And Puerto Rico is weird because it's not a state, it's a territory. And there's been all sorts of, we talked a little bit about the history. So I would expect that. Anyway, I guess my point on this is other than trying to embody the standard and trying to remind people the standard, there's no accountability, it seems, anymore. So nobody is incentivized to actually give it. And then I think everybody is just so overwhelmed and overburdened that they're just trying to scramble to get by. And so those kind of things just fall on the wayside.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There are so many different ways of communicating now, and it's a mixture of many things. You made the comment, people suck, and I wouldn't take it to that extreme, but I do think it's very difficult when you're working with different people and each person has their own way of communicating, right? So we were talking last time about how do I work, or how do you work with me kind of thing in a manager perspective, but I think it's just as important in co-founder or a startup environment where each individual is expected to contribute in some way, shape, or form. So you should know how each of you works with each other or works best. And when you have a mix of individuals who all communicate differently, even if you establish the protocol of, hey, let's do this and this, if you're not trained in that behavior or if you're not cognizant of it, you're going to communicate the way you normally communicate. So it's really trying to find the balance of how to best communicate information to each other, being like critical to how things work in an organization, and even more so in smaller groups where there's so much information if you're moving rapidly, there's so much information that's happening. And once you miss one meeting or you miss one conversation, you're already a bit behind. And if you can't catch up, then it just snowballs.
Well, and that's the thing.
And that's kind of what I'm
is like the flow of information changes so fast that, again, like, people can't tend to keep up, period. But if you get out of that flow for some reason, then, like you said, it's a compounding problem of falling further and further behind, faster and faster behind. But I also think that kind of in this phenomenon of there's just too much, I don't know what you would call it. There's probably a word for it and it escapes me, but I would almost say reliability or like principles are seemingly no longer a thing. So the Americana of you show up early to an event or something, so you're not late. Not being late is the principle. Showing up early is like a tactic to prevent you from violating the principle.
Yeah.
That kind of shit seems like it also doesn't exist anymore. And part of that's like a cultural norm. Part of that is you might even call it like a morality, because like you don't want to waste someone else's time. And so the moral right thing to do would be to like not be late or show up early. Yeah. And I think because of there's so many different options, there's so many different ways of doing everything, like there is no cultural norm. But it used to be like if somebody called you, you called them back. Right? Or you just picked up the phone, and then answering machines were developed. And if you got a message, most people would call you back at their earliest convenience, which would typically be same day. Or maybe the next day, or if you're out on vacation or something, it might be a few days. And if you didn't hear from somebody the next day and you left a message, you're probably calling them back if it's relatively important. The amount of change in our society that technology has enabled and empowered escapes most people's ability to cope.
Tune next week to hear part 2, where we take on the biggest topic of our time, artificial intelligence. We're developing a technology we can't fully control or predict. Should we be treating it less like a Silicon Valley startup and more like a dangerous virus? The debate you're not hearing in the mainstream. Next time on 3reate.
You can find us at 3reate.com. It's like the word create, but with a 3 instead of the C. As always, we encourage you to listen, watch, do. We'll see you next time.
You can support this podcast at patreon.com/3reate or at ko-fi.com/3reate.
Thanks for listening.